Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today as we continue our weekly discussions based on the book, The Integral Human Being. As we keep moving, we can go back to the fact that we are on chapter one. And I wanted to say to you, because I mentioned this previously in our introduction last week, that the psychological series or psychology collection is a 16-book series by spiritual author Joanna de Angelis in collaboration with Divaldo Pereira Franco. And I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that the significance of these books is really evidenced by what Joanna de Angelis did, which is this creation of a bridge between spiritism and transpersonal psychology. So while we're talking and bringing some of the key topics, you can start to see that linkage really start to be established here. But we'll continue our weekly discussions and really looking forward to your feedback, your remarks as we peek one layer at a time on those insightful messages and perspective that is found in this second book of the series. If we start looking here on the content, and I mentioned this before, by the way, we will go over 40 chapters, and this is chapter one today. And the topics range from, say, anxiety, loneliness, ethical consciousness, etc. And they are broken down into those nine parts. So, very interesting for us to see. And I really look forward to have you join me in exploring all those viewpoints and those themes from Spiritism and Transpersonal Psychology. So, let's get started. If we look into the slide here, I wanted to talk to you about the very first chapter of a book. It is grim. I'm saying very grim view of where we are and really what humanity has been gone through for the past a couple of 100 years, right? A couple 150 years plus. That's where the time frame that she brings. So on one hand, we cannot dismiss the amazing technological achievements we have made as a human race. On the other hand, yeah, there is a very strong evidence that no matter how much we have achieved, say through science or any other technological advances, we are in this state of turmoil that Joanna brings us to here. So, what's important for us to talk in the next few minutes together is that Joanna de Angelis calls the results of this path that we have taken, and this is our path that has led to a transformation. And think about it as a human, but a human beings, but also as a human race. She talks about this transformation into, and I quote, a heap of organic matter that thinks parenthetically on its way towards annihilation at the grave. Whew. So the author concludes that we human beings, humans, are now throwing ourselves into the sense of utter bewilderment with the one objective, which is let us attain what ephemeral, transitory, momentary possessions, material things, and also this enormous need to control others, to dominate others. And third area of this triangle, this unending pursuit of satisfaction through pleasure. Ouch. So let's think about it. This is a 1990 book. It was published only 2 decades ago. It begs us the question, is that really where we are as a human race or as a human being? Do you agree with that? Well, let's go ahead and get started looking at what Joanna brings to us. Yes, she highlights that we live in a world at war. If we go back to the introduction of the book, there was a beautiful, in my opinion, beautiful introduction that spanned, about 3,000 years, 3 millennia, about the evolution of human thoughts, right? So, all the way from Pythagoras to where we are today, Joanna brought forth how the schools of thoughts have evolved, and we have evolved as a human race. And it's beautifully, beautifully brought to us. But then she brings us this a new focus to our awareness of where we are and where we've been through, which is this focus of a world at war. And I just wanted to remind ourselves of some of the conflicts that have popped up and on it. And by no means, this is not a complete list, but it's a list that is, to me, quite harsh, right? It's a list that is too long, and it really sheds light to something that's going on with ourselves. So, one after another, the West, especially Europe, but then it moved toward, most specifically, Asia, Southeast Asia, right? Russia, Asia, and now focus of wars are really in the Middle East. We see wars, conflicts, destroying lives, destroying neighborhoods, destroying entire communities, if not also nations. So let's just go ahead and list them so we can start to look at the chronology of the past, say, 150 years. Crimean War, not the most recent one, but the first one that ended in 1856. So roughly 170 years ago, right? Crimean War ends, but it doesn't really end. All of that area of the world was really unsettled. And about 50 years later, it erupts into the First World War, 1914 to 1918. Wait, is it over? Do we get to armistice? Does the world learn that we cannot pursue things like that before we kill ourselves? No, not so. While the World War One was happening, 14 to 18, we also have, for example, the Russian Civil War, right? Remember, 1917, it started and went all the way for until roughly, I believe, 1922. In that meantime, there is a Afghan war, the third Afghan war in 1919. It doesn't end there, right? 1920s, 1930s. Now we have the Spanish Civil War, 36 to 39, the Arab revolt in Palestine, 36, 39, So you start to see what's going on in the world, right? World War II then erupts in 1939 to 1945. Immediately after that, what's going on? The world being rebuilt after a terrible, terrible 5+ years in a war. We also now have the India being becoming independent. There is Korean War, right? 1950, 1953. Vietnam Wars, 55 to 75, Gulf War, now 1990 to 91, War in Afghanistan, 2001, 2014, Iraq War, 2003 to 2011, Syria conflicts that started in 2011 to date. It hasn't really stopped. This global coalition to defeat ISIS that is in place since 2014. Let's not forget that underneath all of this, there is the Cold War era that really began in 1947 and ended, yeah, Berlin Wall, right, in 1991. And around the same time, we call the apartheid era, roughly simultaneous to the Cold War, where we start to see the apartheid as a state in 1948 all the way to early 1990s. So if we stop to reflect upon uh, just the impact of wars, which is really savagery, right? It is madness. And it does not end. It is a continuation of conflict. And as I said before, this is just a glimpse of all the theaters of war that we see in the world up to today since 1850. So if we think about we seriously, but Marcia, why? Joanna de Angelis, why? Do you have an answer? Why? What is leading us humans to just be at war with each other? And she just says, well, the reason behind, and it's not the root cause by any means, but one of the causes are, right? Ideologies. So if I believe in this and I believe in that, there is a war to see whose ideology, which ideology is prevalent. Others just purely national interest, territorial interest, or others something as simple as yes, that dark matter. No, not universe, but oil, right? Who, what territory can I control so that I can have access to oil? Since the Second World War and the Cold War era, we have to now confront with the idea that we're under the threat of total destruction. Isn't that true? Total destruction because we are developing more and more, oh, say, sophisticated and more destructive weapons that are being created of all types of sorts, right? If I can go back several decades ago, where we were under the threat of weapons of mass destruction as a title of a whole era that spearheaded so many other conflicts. But the words that also come to my mind, let's say, are trauma. Right, we are working and with many veterans here in the U.S., and we are seeing how devastating the trauma for participating to ensure that this country, this nation, is a free nation. They themselves, as an individual, as part of the whole, are being traumatized. Their wounds, their unspeakable pains, not only on the veterans, but entire communities, entire nations, right? Those communities are torn apart. I just remember real quickly somebody that I had just fond memories to have worked with her, and she talked about in the Bosnia in the 80s, right, where she says her neighbor became her enemy, and that's something very very true to that. How can your neighbor, the neighbor where both that yours and their children used to play together in the morning or throughout the day over the weekend, and now they're your sworn enemy for whatever. So communities really being torn apart, and if we can say it, we can say it's just brutality, right? Brutal force and strength, but most importantly, brutalize individuals. We that are part of those conflicts, either as victims or as, say, soldiers or the decision makers, we are all becoming somehow brutalized. And Joanna brings this image of, very interesting, by the way, of a fear and cynicism shaking hands in an irreconcilable conspiracy. And I think this is such an impactful sentence that she brings to us. An image of fear and cynicism shaking hands in an irreconcilable conspiracy. What is that conspiracy that she brings to us? Well, think about Holocaust and sacrifice, crimes in the name of freedom. Humanity and human beings like you and me reduced to our lowest possible condition due to environmental aspects, from, say, apartheid to class struggles to a life of perhaps escaping, right? Escaping mechanism, whatever that is, that I can escape this reality, which leads, and we'll see a lot of that in this book, but most importantly in the sequence in the psychological series of Joanna, where she talks a lot about those defense mechanism, the escape mechanism that we utilize consciously or unconsciously. In this case, regarding war, a world torn apart by war, we're talking about from, say, alcoholism to drug and hallucinogenic drugs, as well as, unfortunately, mental instability, all the way to a world that is ravaged to date by suicide. By the way, I want to say this. Just yesterday, I found something that warmed my heart, because suicide is something that is really, really an area that is very difficult for me to deal with. There are several of those, but suicide is one of them. But I found yesterday that for the first time ever, in Europe, in other areas of the world, suicide rate is actually diminishing. How about that? Not in the Americas, though, and I live in the Americas, of course, in North America, but in the West as well as other regions of the world, the World Health Organization has started to see a decrease in the rate of suicide. So good stuff. Good to hear that. Anyways, let's just keep going on our discussion, because yes, there is this external psychosphere of fear, and that's the picture that Joanna continues to paint, and she talks about all that goes around us are leading to where we are today. And she brings about what she calls philosophical movements, right? Anything that will capture our imagination. And she's specifically a concern about those movements, just taking hold of the young but disillusioned minds, which in itself it is a catastrophe, in my opinion. Joanna calls out, oh, nihilism to existentialism, which are kind of easier to counter, right? But then if you think about, there are some more recent countercultural, extravagant, in the eyes of mainstream society, behaviors that are aggressive, that debase our values. They're violent and independent of an actual war. They are found inside our homes. And that's what she brings, this idea that, yeah, we live in a world that faces the paradox of modernity. We live a life of agony at the same time that we have access, unprecedented access to wealth, to comfort, to power. And she just, gives an example of travel, air travel, right? I can go, I don't know, let's say my longest trip without stop in my life was from Atlanta, departing from Atlanta to South Africa, Johannesburg, 15 hours in the plane. And yes, we can do it. We can wake up in another continent in Africa and in one trip. It's amazing. But she says it's not just air travel, it's not just the comfort, but think about science. Science continues to uncover this universe of information and uncovering, including life-saving, right, strategies, including, for example, we as a human race in surviving the COVID-19 pandemic, and we are now living without masks. We're having human contact again because it is controlled. There, we are at a point that this has been put at bay, right? But she says it is really perplexing if we look at this human landscape. Think about it. To me, it's quite unimaginable, but it is where we are. A little bit of perhaps a post-apocalyptic view in that we see movies, but this is our lives in so many communities. Some are afraid to open the door and leave their fortified homes because violence and crime is right there, right? Our cities, and we're talking about especially very dense cities, are at the center stage of violence, economic disparity, misery, aggressive social behaviors where nobody is paying attention in the other, right? And a sore subject for me, especially homelessness. But Joanna reminds us of this external psychosphere. So let's just stop to say, what is she talking about? What is psychosphere? Psychosphere is simply saying it's a place of awareness, of consciousness. It's that sphere of collective consciousness of where we are. And she says this external psychosphere is asphyxiating. We cannot breathe with so much fear. And she says we are becoming dehumanized, and we do this as it is evidence when we surrender to fear. And by fear, we talk about one of the four basic emotions: fear, anger, sadness, joy, right? But when we surrender to fear, let's start to think about fear, anxiety, right? Panic, and mental instability of any mental disorder out there. But we surrender to it. The other part of it, or the other side of this psychosphere fear, is that we may become the agents of fear, where we, in order to save ourselves and not become afraid, live in fear, we then we generate fear in others. Or, yeah, there's a third option, the option of becoming indifferent of it all. This apathy of whatever's going on, I don't care. I'm not going to read about it. I'm not going to react. I'm not going to emote, because my defense mechanism to this world that seems to be falling apart, I'm just going to be without any emotion. And with that, we see that we are facing, as a human race, more and more behavioral disorders, right? And with that, Joanna comes to us saying there is an immediate, urgent need for what she calls an emotional, cultural, religious, and psychological reformation. She says we need to change in all those aspects, right? Our emotional universe, our cultural references, our religious and psychological identities, so that we can start to self identify again as humans. Do you see the urgency of it all? It is grim, but she tells us, yes, the darkest hour is just before dawn. I can hear the song in the back of my mind. So for us, in order to spearhead the changes, the very first step for us is this realignment, and I put it in the slide, this realignment of our cosmic identity. So she says we need to start to unveil the sex sphere of fear, which is, driven by our lack of humanity, and is destroying our sense of humanity. So let's first and foremost self-identify in our humanity, but also realign our cosmic identity. What are we talking about? She's just simply saying we must, it's beautiful, we must be open to love. When we open ourselves to love, we now can lead a life where we can trust, and we can look everything and see light, beauty, and hope again. And I just want to open a parenthesis here, because when we say that we need to open ourselves to love, we may think about, well, the opposite of love is what? And many definitions or literature would say the opposite of love is hatred. And certainly we talked about conflicts and war, etc., that identify with lack of love and hatred. Some people will define the opposite of love is actual indifference, and she talked about it's a defense mechanism to save yourself, is you become indifferent. But this is really the bridge to from spiritism to transpersonal psychology, right? So we have to bring up, even if it's just for a second, Carl Gustav Jung, the Swiss psychoanalyst, and he brings that idea very clearly, and you can research that the the opposite of love is actually the thirst for power. And when we look at everything that has happened in the past, say, 175 years, in terms of those wars that we listed earlier, you can see that is not an environment that really thrived in love. It thrived in this thirst for power. And she says, right, there is this long night that has choked the essence of humanity, right? And I agree it has. It is it is terrible to think about all that's going on or have gone on in the past 2 centuries. But she reminds us this is just the beginning of the dawn of society, this new society. And she brings us the sense that believe in God, right? Believe in the spirits of light, believe in this cosmic identity and realignment, because it is really changing so that we are about to embark in personal renewals and access to trust toward a better world in a happier society. So, with that, I would like to just conclude that the reason for us to exist is to pursue those values that are hidden deeply inside of ourselves, right? So in the next weeks together, let's us uncover what they are, those values that we hide from ourselves. And Joanna is saying, come with me. Let's discover life. Let's confront life. Let's triumph over life. And I ask you, are you ready? I am. So if you are, come with me next week when we talk about a very interesting topic next week called routine. Thank you so much for being with me today.